Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, now that we've got a definite date and time for Boris Johnson's oral evidence to the Privileges Committee over Partygate lies to Parliament, I'd like to discuss some of the issues around it and build up to how he might be able to try and deceive the panel without risking imprisonment. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So when the news came out that Johnson was getting close to his hearing, I heard the date March the 20th and I thought, that's okay. I thought Monday, that's a good day. That's a good day. Then I heard it was just the week beginning the 20th and I thought, oh, there are better days than Mondays, but there are worse. Now we know the exact date. Yesterday it was announced that Johnson would be giving his evidence on Wednesday the 22nd of March at 2 p.m. This is not the first time that Boris Johnson has done something without checking if it fits my schedule. This, I have to say, is not convenient. It's shortly after PMQs, possibly too late to bring out a video on the hearing on the same day. No, Johnson, this is not convenient. But apart from the trouble that this is going to cause me in my schedule, I suppose what is of more concern to more people is how will Boris Johnson conduct himself? Just to reiterate, that if it is shown that Boris Johnson either knew he was misleading Parliament at the time his mouth was flapping, or if he was subsequently told and did not take immediate action to correct the parliamentary record, then he has misled Parliament. It is very likely that under either of these circumstances, he will be guilty of a contempt of Parliament. The committee would recommend a penalty, a suspension, and then MPs would have to vote to support or reject it. Despite what some people fear, MPs are not going to vote to reject it. I keep trying to remind people the reason this investigation is taking place at all, because this is like our version of impeachment, really. The only reason it's taking place is because Tory MPs didn't dare to vote to stop it when Keir Starmer presented the motion to Parliament. If they didn't dare stop the investigation before evidence was gathered and published, they're certainly not going to dare to vote it to reject the punishment after the evidence is a matter of public record, which it sort of now is. As for the length of suspension, we cannot know what it will be. However, we do know what presents the major hazard to Johnson. If the suspension is for at least 2 weeks, then Johnson's constituents have the opportunity to recall him from Parliament via a recall petition. The petition only needs the signatures of 10% of registered voters in his constituency, and that is that. That threshold is certain to be met. That will then mean Boris Johnson is no longer an MP. Goodbye, sayonara. He is very unlikely to contest his own seat. He'd be allowed to, very unlikely to do so. He'll come up with an excuse to sulk for a bit, so it doesn't look like he's running away from a tough fight, while he looks for a safer seat. If he did contest it, very, very likely to lose. And that would puncture his aura of election-winning prowess. And if Johnson is recalled, then the heat is off Sunak completely. No point agitating against him with Johnson out the frame, should there be another leadership contest. So if Johnson still harbours hopes of replacing Sunak again, he needs to dodge this committee hearing. The published evidence against him is impressive. Boris Johnson has been given the best part of £250,000 to pay of our money to pay for the best legal advice in order to prepare him for the hearing. Lord Panic KC, top legal mind. The main comfort is that the last time he was hired to represent Johnson's interests during the prorogation of Parliament case at the Supreme Court, he lost. You know, but he's a top lawyer. He's not a miracle worker. At this hearing, just as with the Supreme Court case, Johnson is not really giving him much to work with. You cannot make a silk purse from a pig's ear. But Panic will still be preparing Johnson for this hearing. We know that Johnson's a liar. We know that he'll argue black is white in order to get himself out of a hole. He will tell the most ridiculous, unbelievable lies just to take the heat off for a few days. He's like a 5-year-old who's caught with their hand in the biscuit tin. Only he's got a problem this time. He will be given his evidence under oath. Now, it's not usual for witnesses to give evidence to parliamentary select committees under oath. It's very rare, but the provision exists for the committees to demand it. And given that Johnson is a known liar and that this case is very much about telling lies, they are demanding it. And lying under oath to a select committee carries the full penalty of perjury as if you'd lied in court. If Johnson tells an objective untruth, and it can be proven that he's deliberately lied to the committee under oath, he can be prosecuted for perjury and, if found guilty, face imprisonment. Some people think he won't be able to help himself. I don't believe that. Twice in 2019, Johnson also faced potential contempt of court and twice backed off. The first was during that prorogation case. The court asked ministers for a signed affidavit detailing the stated reasons for proroguing Parliament. They were basically saying to the government, look, you're saying you prorogue Parliament for these reasons? Fine. Write them down, sign it as being true and present it to this court. At which point, neither Johnson nor any of his cabinet ministers went, all right then. And therefore the case collapsed because they refused to basically state on oath in court that their reasons were genuine. Because they knew that once the truth came out, they would find themselves in court charged with perjury. The second time was in relation to the Benn Act, where MPs legislated to force Johnson to seek an extension to the Article 50 Brexit process in order to prevent our automatic exit from the EU without a deal. A case was presented to the Court of Session in Scotland with the implied statement from the judges that if Johnson didn't comply with the Act, he could be in contempt of court and find himself doing porridge. Johnson complied. So as cavalier as Johnson is about a lot of things, I think he's shown in the past he will not risk imprisonment. He won't risk actual consequences. That doesn't mean he won't lie, just that he won't do so in a way which risks prison time. To my mind, there are two types of lie which Johnson might tell. The first is one which cannot possibly be exposed, or at least for which it won't be possible to find the evidence which meets the standard required to prove guilt for a serious charge in court. The second would be a more subjective lie. In other words, offering up opinions which are clearly ludicrous and no sane person would believe, but would not meet the bar necessary for a perjury prosecution. And I think we got a taste of this second one when the committee published its main evidence a couple of weeks ago. I said at the time, I was surprised that Johnson made himself available for questioning so quickly. The committee gave him time. They said he'll have at least 2 weeks to prepare, but they didn't say, but we want him to do it within this time frame. It's like, give us a date. You're going to have at least 2 weeks, but give us a date. They weren't hassling him for a date very shortly after it, but Johnson came back on the same day and said he'd happy present himself after that 2 weeks. He didn't want any extra time, basically. That was a sign that he was confident that he'd already prepared. And shortly afterwards, he gave interviews. Now, in those interviews, he insisted that he implicitly thought that the events were within the rules, the idiot defence, basically. Now, I'm not an expert on any aspect of criminal law, or indeed any other law, but maybe he's been told that you won't have a perjury case against you for a lie like this. We all know there's no way he could have thought he was following his own lockdown laws. But maybe in court, to prove he's lying, you'd have to prove he wasn't a delusional idiot. Might be tricky with Johnson. So, with that lie, he attempts to nullify the idea he deliberately misled Parliament at the time he gave his statements. He's pretending he was too stupid to understand his own rules. Okay. The second line he took was that what the committee has published doesn't prove that anyone informed him that his statements to MPs were wrong. This is also nonsense because they have documents which show that his top officials were all talking about how the events were breaking the rules. Inconceivable that they didn't have the same conversations verbally with Johnson himself. To believe Johnson here, you would have to believe that all of his top aides were appointed by him were discussing the illegality of the events with each other, but deliberately keeping Johnson in the dark. In other words, this would be as mad a conspiracy theory as any that emerged from the pandemic. But again, you can see the strategy. This sort of lie, also unlikely to result in a perjury charge, because what's he doing? He's offering up his inexpert opinion on the weight of evidence. And it's a lie which gets him out of the second charge, which is that he was told he'd misled Parliament and then did nothing to correct the record in a timely manner. And I think those interviews were a trial run for the hearing itself. Consider that the committee hearing is not a court of law. He can't be treated like a hostile witness like he could in court if he was to be so evasive. He'll just come out with prepared statements in line with his legal advice. Whether or not those statements really answer the question or not, completely irrelevant. As far as I know, there's no real penalty for not really answering the question properly, other than the committee deciding he's been evasive and therefore as guilty as sin. For Boris Johnson, this hearing, it's not an opportunity for him to clear his name. He's not going to clear his name. He's guilty. It's quite obvious. And the public see that as well. It's a cross-examination that he can't get out of and needs to just get through without doing himself further reputational harm. If he does offer up the sorts of answers that he was given in those interviews, he'll still look guilty to most people, not least of which will be the panel. That's fine. He only needs to be able to claim witch hunts to the stupid. See, most people already know what he did. Very few people believe he was innocent in any way at all. That's why Tory MPs couldn't vote to sink this investigation. If people sort of thought that Keir Starmer was making a big issue out of this, it wasn't that big a deal, Tory MPs would have been absolutely free to vote against it and for the investigation never to happen in the first place. The reason they couldn't is because even their voters knew he was guilty and knew it would be a stitch up, much worse than the Owen Paterson situation. So very few people believe he's innocent in any way at all. The problem with his idiot defence is that it only works on idiots. A lot of people in this country, they're badly misinformed by our completely unfit for purpose news media. And of course, you know, shades of grey. If you've got a genius, obviously the average person seems stupid to them. But most people are not that stupid. All he can hope to do is convince enough of those who are that stupid, who already think there's a benefit of doubt, that there remains a reasonable element of doubt, and then hope his client media can put enough pressure on the committee to use that element of doubt as a sort of exit path towards acquitting him, or if not acquitting him, at least offering a penalty that is less than the 2-week suspension. He'll take a 1 day less than 2-week suspension because materially it doesn't affect him. And if that doesn't happen, if you can't nobble the committee, that same media then puts pressure on Tory MPs to reject a greater penalty on the basis that even if they say, yeah, OK, Johnson's clearly guilty of, you know, some wrongdoing here, that the penalty is excessive. You know, I think this is the line Johnson will take. He'll not risk telling a lie which could see him go to court. He'll tell lies, but safe lies. Ones which fall below the bar for legal proof in a criminal case. Obviously, I don't know where that bar is, but I'll tell you who does. Panic KC. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.